The primary aim of this book is to explain the remarkable rule which regulated the succession to the priesthood of Diana at Aricia. When I first set myself to solve the problem more than 30 years ago, I thought that the solution could be propounded very briefly, but I soon found that to render it probable or even intelligible, it was necessary to discuss certain more general questions, some of which had hardly been broached before. In successive editions, the discussion of these kindred topics has occupied more and more space. The inquiry has branched out in more and more directions until the 2 volumes of the original work have expanded into 12. Meantime, a wish has often been expressed that the book should be issued in a more compendious form. This abridgment is an attempt to meet the wish and thereby to bring the work within the range of a wider circle of readers. While the bulk of the book has been greatly reduced, I have endeavored to retain its leading principles, together with an amount of evidence sufficient to illustrate them clearly. The language of the original has also for the most part been preserved, though here and there the exposition has been somewhat condensed. In order to keep as much of the text as possible, I have sacrificed all the notes, and with them all exact references to my authorities. Readers who desire to ascertain the source of any particular statement must therefore consult the larger work, which is fully documented and provided with a complete bibliography. In the abridgment, I have neither added new matter nor altered the views expressed in the last edition, for the evidence which has come to my knowledge in the meantime has on the whole served either to confirm my former conclusions or to furnish fresh illustrations of old principles. Thus, for example, on the crucial question of the practice of putting kings to death, either at the end of a fixed period or whenever their health and strength began to fail, the body of evidence which points to the wide prevalence of such a custom has been considerably augmented in the interval. A striking instance of a limited monarchy of this sort is furnished by the powerful medieval kingdom of the Khazars, the Khazars, the Khazars, the Khazars, the Khazars, the Khazars in southern Russia, where the kings were liable to be put to death either on the expiry of a set term or whenever some public calamity such as drought, dearth, or defeat in war seem to indicate a failure of their natural powers. Oh, oops. The evidence for the systematic killing of the Khazars, of the Khazar kings, the evidence for the systematic killing, the evidence for the systematic killing, the evidence for the systematic killing of the Khazar kings, drawn from the accounts of old Arab travelers, has been collected by me elsewhere. G.J. Fraser, The Killing of the Khazar Kings, Folklore, 1917. Africa, again, has supplied several fresh examples of a similar practice of regicide. Among them, the most notable perhaps is a custom formerly observed in Bunyoro of choosing every year from a particular clan a mock king who was supposed to incarnate the late king, cohabited with his widows at his temple tomb, and after reigning for a week was strangled. The custom presents a close parallel to the ancient Babylonian festival of the Saqqara, Babylonian festival of the Sakaka, at which a mock king was dressed in the royal robes, allowed to enjoy the real king's concubines, and after reigning for 5 days was stripped, scourged, and put to death. That festival in its turn has lately received fresh light from certain Assyrian inscriptions, which seem to confirm the interpretation which I formerly gave of the festival as a New Year celebration and the parent of the Jewish Babylonian parent of the Jewish, scourged, stripped, scourged, and put to death. The parent of the Jewish festival of Purim. Other recently discovered parallels to the priestly kings of Arisia are African priests and kings who used to be put to death at the end of 7 or 2 years after being liable in the interval to be attacked and killed by a strong man, who thereupon succeeded to the priesthood or the kingdom. The priesthood. With these and other instances of like customs before us, it is no longer possible to regard the rule of succession to the priesthood of Diana at Arisia as exceptional. It clearly exemplifies a widespread institution of which the most numerous and the most similar cases have thus far been found in Africa. How far the facts point to an early influence of Africa on Italy, or even to the existence of an African population in southern Europe, I do not presume to say. The prehistoric relations between the two continents are still obscure and still under investigation. Whether the explanation which I have offered of the institution is correct or not must be left to the future to determine. I shall always be ready to abandon it if a better can be suggested. Meantime, in committing the book in its new form to the judgment of the public, I desire to guard against a misapprehension of its scope which appears to be still rife, though I have sought to correct it before now. If in the present work I have dwelt at some length on the worship of trees, the worship of trees, it is not, I trust, because I exaggerate its importance in the history of religion, still less because I would deduce from it a whole system of mythology. It is simply because I could not ignore the subject in attempting to explain the significance of a priest who bore the title of King of the Wood. King of the Wood, King of the Wood, King of the Wood, and one of whose titles to office was the plucking of a bow. The plucking of a bow, the golden bow from a tree in the sacred grove, the sacred grove, the sacred grove. Sacred grove. But I am so far from regarding the reverence for trees, as of supreme importance for the evolution of religion, that I consider it to have been altogether subordinate to other factors, and in particular to the fear of the human dead, fear of the human dead, which on the whole I believe to have been probably the most powerful force in the making of primitive religion. I hope that after this explicit disclaimer, I shall no longer be taxed with embracing a system of mythology which I look upon not merely as false, but as preposterous and absurd. But I am too familiar with the hydra of error to expect that by looping off one of the monster's heads I can prevent another, or even the same, from sprouting again. I can only trust to the candor and intelligence of my readers to rectify this serious misconception of my views by a comparison with my own express declaration. G.J. Fraser, 1 Brick Court, Temple, London, June 1922. Chapter 1. The King of the Wood. Diana and Verbius. Who does not know Turner's pictures of the golden bow? Who does not know Turner's pictures of the golden bow? The scene suffused with the golden glow of imagination in which the divine mind of Turner steeped and transfigured even the fairest natural landscape is a dreamlike vision of the little woodland lake of Nemi, Diana's mirror, as it was called by the ancients. No one who has seen that calm water lapped in a green hollow of the Alban Hills can ever forget it. The two characteristic Italian villages which slumber on its banks, and the equally Italian palace whose terraced gardens descend steeply to the lake, hardly break the stillness and even the solitariness of the scene. Diana herself might still linger by this lonely shore, still haunt these woodlands wild. In antiquity, the sylvan landscape was the scene of a strange and recurring tragedy. On the northern shore of the lake, right under the precipitous cliffs on which the modern village of Nemi is perched, stood the sacred grove, grove, and sanctuary of Diana Nemorensis, or Diana of the wood. The lake and the grove were sometimes known as the lake and grove of Aricia, but the town of Aricia, the modern Laricia, was situated about 3 miles off at the foot of the Alban Mount and separated by a steep descent from the lake, which lies in a small crater-like hollow on the mountainside. In this sacred grove there grew a certain tree round which at any time of the day, and probably far into the night, a grim figure might be seen to prowl. In his hand he carried a drawn sword, and he kept peering warily about him as if at every instant he expected to be set upon by an enemy. He was a priest and a murderer. 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 And the man for whom he looked was sooner or later to murder him and hold the priesthood in his stead. Such was the rule of the sanctuary. Such was the rule of the sanctuary. A candidate for the priesthood could only succeed to office by slaying the priest. A candidate for the priesthood could only succeed to office by slaying the priest. A candidate to the priesthood could only succeed to office by slaying the priest. And having slain him, he retained office till he was himself slain by a stronger or a craftier. The post which he held by this precarious tenure carried with it the title of king. But surely no crowned head ever lay uneasier or was visited by more evil dreams than his. For year in, year out, in summer and winter, in fair weather and in foul, he had to keep his lonely watch, and whenever he snatched a troubled slumber, it was at the peril of his life. The least relaxation of his vigilance, the smallest abatement of his strength or limb or skill of fence, put him in jeopardy. Gray hairs might seal his death warrant. To gentle and pious pilgrims, to gentle and pious pilgrims at the shrine, the sight of him might well seem to darken their fair landscape, as when a cloud suddenly blots the sun on a bright day. The dreamy blue of Italian skies, the dappled shade of summer woods, and the sparkle of waves in the sun can have accorded but ill with that stern and sinister figure. Rather, we picture to ourselves the scene as it might have been witnessed by a belated wayfarer on one of those wild autumn nights when the dead leaves are falling thick and the winds seem to sing the dirge of the dying year. It is a somber picture set to melancholy music, the background of forest showing black and jagged against the lowering and stormy sky, the sighing of the wind in the branches, the rustle of the withered leaves underfoot, the lapping of the cold water on the shore, and in the foreground, pacing to and fro, now in twilight and now in gloom, a dark figure with a glitter of steel at the shoulder whenever the pale moon, riding clear of the cloud rack, peers down at him through the matted boughs. The strange rule of this priesthood has no parallel in classical antiquity and cannot be explained from it. To find an explanation, we must go farther afield. No one will probably deny that such a custom savors of a barbarous age, and surviving into imperial times stands out in striking isolation from the polished Italian society. polished, polished, polished. The polished Italian society of the day, like a primeval rock rising from a smooth-shaven lawn. It is the very rudeness and barbarity of the custom which allows us a hope of explaining it, for recent researches into the early history of man have revealed the essential similarity with which, under many superficial differences, the human mind has elaborated its first crude philosophy of life. Accordingly, we can show that a barbarous custom like that of the priesthood of Nemi has existed elsewhere. We can detect the motives, which led to its institutions. If we can prove that these motives have operated widely, prove that these motives have operated widely, but perhaps universally in human society, producing in varied circumstances a variety of institutions, specifically different but generally alike. If we can show, lastly, that these very motives with some of their derivative institutions were actually at work in classical antiquity, then we may fairly infer that at a remoter age the same motives gave birth to the priesthood of Nemi. Such an inference, in default of direct evidence as to how the priesthood did actually arise, can never amount to demonstration, but it will be more or less probable according to the degree of completeness with which it fulfills the conditions I have indicated. The object of this book is, by meeting these conditions, to offer a fairly probable explanation of the priesthood of Nemi. I begin by setting forth the few facts and legends which have come down to us on the subject. According to one story, the worship of Diana at Nemi was instituted by Orestes, who, after killing Thoas, king of the Tauric Chersonesus, the Crimea, fled with his sister to Italy, bringing with him the image of the Tauric Diana, hidden in a faggot of sticks. After his death, his bones were transported from Aricia to Rome and buried in front of the temple of Saturn on the Capitoline slope beside the temple of Conqueror. The bloody ritual, which legend ascribed to the Tauric Diana is familiar to classical readers. It is said that every stranger who landed on the shore was sacrificed on her altar, but transported to Italy, the right assumed a milder form. Within the sanctuary at Nemi grew a certain tree of which no branch might be broken. Only a runaway slave was allowed to break off, if he could, one of its boughs. Success in the attempt entitled him to fight the priest in single combat, and if he slew him, he reigned in his stead with the title of King of the Wood, Rex Nemorensis. According to the public opinion of the ancients, the fateful branch was that golden bow which, at the Sibyl's bidding, Aeneas plucked before he essayed the perilous journey to the world of the dead. The flight of the slave represented, it was said, the flight of Orestes. His combat with the priest was reminiscence of the human sacrifices once offered to the Tauric Diana. This rule of succession by the sword was observed down to imperial times, for amongst his other freaks, Caligula, thinking that the priest of Nemi had held office too long, hired a more stalwart ruffian to slay him, and a Greek traveler who visited Italy in the age of the Antonines remarked that down to his time the priesthood was still the price of victory in a single combat. Of the worship of Diana at Nemi, some leading features can still be made out from the votive offerings which have been found on the site. It appears that she was conceived of specially as a huntress, and further as blessing men and women with offspring, and granting expectant mothers an easy delivery. Again, fire seems to have played a foremost part in her ritual, for during her annual festival held on the 13th of August, at the hottest time of the year, her grove shone with a multitude of torches, whose ruddy glare was reflected by the lake, and throughout the length and breadth of Italy, the day was kept with holy rites at every domestic hearth. Bronze statuettes found in her precincts represent the goddess herself holding a torch in her raised hand, and women whose prayers had been heard by her came crowned with wreaths and bearing lighted torches to the sanctuary in fulfillment of their vows. One unknown dedicated a perpetually burning lamp in a little shrine at Nemi for the safety of the Emperor Claudius and his family. The terracotta lamps which have been discovered in the grove may perhaps have served a like purpose for humbler persons. If so, the analogy of the custom to the Catholic practice of dedicating holy candles in churches would be obvious. Further, the title of Vesta, borne by Diana at Nemi, points clearly to the maintenance of a perpetual holy fire in her sanctuary. A larger circular basement at the northeast corner of the temple raised on 3 steps and bearing traces of a mosaic pavement, probably supported a round temple of Diana in her character of Vesta, like the round temple of Vesta in the Roman Forum. Here the sacred fire would seem to have been tended by Vestal virgins, for the head of a Vestal in terracotta was found on the spot, and the worship of a perpetual fire cared for by holy maidens appeared to have been common in Latium from the earliest to the latest times. Further, at the annual festival of the goddess, hunting dogs were crowned and wild beasts were not molested. Young people went through a purificatory ceremony in her honor. Wine was brought forth, and the feast consisted of a kid, cake served piping hot on plates of leaves, and apples still hanging in clusters on the boughs. But Diana did not reign alone in her grove at Nemi. 2 lesser divinities shared her forest sanctuary. One was Egeria, the nymph of the clear water, which, bubbling from the basaltic rocks, used to fall in graceful cascades in the lake at the place called Le Mole, because here were established the mills of the modern village of Nemi. The purling of the stream as it ran over the pebbles is mentioned by Ovid, who tells us that he had often drunk of its water. Women with child used to sacrifice to Egeria because she was believed, like Diana, to be able to grant them an easy delivery. Tradition ran that the nymph had been the wife or mistress of the wise king Numa, that he had consorted with her in the secrecy, consorted with her in the secrecy of the sacred grove, and that the laws which he gave to the Romans had been inspired by communion with her divinity. Plutarch compares the legend with others. With other tales of the loves of goddesses for mortal men, such as the love of Cybele and the moon for the fair youths Artis and Endymion. According to some, the trysting place of the lovers was not in the woods of Nemi, but in the grove outside the dripping Porta Capena at Rome, where another sacred spring of Egeria gushed from a dark cavern. Every day the Roman Vestals fetched water from this spring to wash the temple of Vesta, carrying it in earthenware pitchers on their heads. In Juvenal's time, the natural rock had been encased in marble, and the hollow spot was profaned by gangs of poor Jews, who were suffered to squat like gypsies in the grove. We may suppose that the spring which fell into the lake of Nemi was the true original Egeria, and that when the first settlers moved down from the Alban hills to the banks of the Tiber, they brought the nymph with them and found a new home for her in a grove outside the gates. The remains of baths, which have been discovered within this sacred precinct, together with many terracotta models of various parts of the human body, suggest that the waters of Egeria were used to heal the sick, who may have signified their hopes or testified their gratitude by dedicating likenesses of the deceased members to the goddess, in accordance with a custom which is still observed in many parts of Europe. To this day, it would seem that the spring retains medicinal virtues. The other of the minor deities at Nemi was Virbius. Legend had it that Virbius was a young Greek hero Hippolytus, chaste, unfair, who learned the art of venery from the centaur Chiron and spent all his days in the greenwood chasing wild beasts, and the virgin huntress Artemis, the Greek counterpart of Diana. For his only comrade, proud of her divine society, he spurned the love of women, and this proved his bane. For Aphrodite, stung by his scorn, inspired his stepmother Phaedra with love of him, and when he disdained her wicked advances, she falsely accused him to his father Theseus. The slander was believed, and Theseus prayed to his sire Poseidon to avenge the imagined wrong. So while Hippolytus drove in a chariot to the shore of the Saronic Gulf, the sea god sent a fierce bull forth from the waves. The terrified horses bolted threw Hippolytus from the chariot and dragged him at their hooves to death. But Diana, for the love she bore Hippolytus, persuaded the leech Aesculapius to bring her fair young hunter back to life by his simples. Jupiter, indignant that a mortal man should return from the gates of death, thrust down the meddling leech himself to Hades. But Diana hid her favorite from the angry god in a thick cloud, disguised his features by adding years to his life, and then bore him far away to the dells of Nemi, where she entrusted him to the nymph Egeria to live there, unknown and solitary, under the name of Virbius, in the depths of the Italian forest. In the depths of the Italian forest, there he reigned a king, and there he dedicated a precinct to Diana. He had a comely son, Virbius, who, undaunted by his father's fate, drove a team of fiery steeds to join the Latins in the war against Aeneas and the Trojans. Virbius was worshipped as a god not only at Nemi but elsewhere, For in Campania we hear of a special priest devoted to his service, a special priest devoted to his service. Horses were excluded from the Arician grove and sanctuary because horses had killed Hippolytus. It was unlawful to touch his image. Some thought that he was the sun, but the truth is, says Servius, that he was a deity associated with Diana, as Attis is associated with the mother of the gods, and Erectonius with Minerva, and Adonis with Venus. What the nature of that association was, we shall inquire presently. Here it is worth observing that in his long and checkered career, this mythical personage has displayed a remarkable tenacity of life, for we can hardly doubt that the Saint Hippolytus of the Roman calendar, who was dragged by horses to death on the 13th of August, Diana's own day, is no other than the Greek hero of the same name, who after dying twice over as a heathen sinner has been happily resuscitated as a Christian saint, Christian saint.